Assalamu alaikum students. Open your books at page 94. It is lesson number 3, unit 18, the wolf girls. At the top we have some questions, but I will give you answer after reading the lesson. So we will move to by reading the lesson first. There are many stories about children who grew up in the wild. In one story, a pair of the twins called Remulus and Remus were brought up by wolves in Italy. Later, they learned to behave like humans and they founded the city of Rome in 753 BC. Some true stories are even stranger than the tales in storybooks. The story of Kamala and Amala is one. In 1920, Mr. Singh was traveling in northeastern India. One evening he stayed in the village where the people were frightened of strange creatures in the forest. The next day they took him into the forest to show him the strange sight. They came to a huge anthill about 5 meters high. In the bottom there were large animal holes. They watched and waited. After sunset, three wolves came out of the tunnels. They were followed by some wolf cubs. Finally, two strange creatures came out on all fours. They had hairy heads and their faces were human. Well, class 5, in these lines we have learned that there are actually many stories about the children who were brought up and who were grown up by the animals. Later they learned to behave like the humans. One story is about the two girls, Remulus and Remus, who were brought up by wolves in Italy, and later they learned to behave like humans and they founded the city of Rome in 753 BC. One more story, another story which is set into 1920s. It is about Mr. Singh. He was traveling in northeastern India. When he stayed in a village, he came across two strange creatures, Kamala and Amala. Actually, the people of the village, they took him into the forest and they showed him the place where they used to live. There were actually 5-meter huge ant hills, and at the bottom of these ant hills there were animal holes, and there lived some wolves with these two girls, Amala and Kamala. Now come to the text again. Mr. Singh wondered how he could catch the two human-like creatures. He came back to the next day with some villagers and they began to dig into the anthill. After a time, two wolves ran out and disappeared into the forest. A third wolf refused to escape. Instead, she defended the tunnel entrance and tried to bite the villagers. The villagers became frightened and killed her. Inside the middle of the anthill, they found the two girls who were terrified. Terrified means frightened. They behaved like wolf cubs and tried to bite them. Mr. Singh, with help, carried them back to his home. Mr. and Mrs. Singh kept the children's home. Parents who couldn't look after their babies used to leave them in the forest. The two girls had grown up with the wolves in the forest. The Singhs called the older one, who was about 8 years old, Kamala. They called the younger one, who was only a year and a half, Amala. But in these two paragraphs, we have learned that Mr. Singh caught them with the help of the villagers. As the girls were brought up by the wolves, so when the villagers tried to rescue the girls, two wolves ran into the forest, but one of them tried to bite the villagers, and it refused to leave the place. Actually, it defended the entrance of the tunnel. Actually, it was defending the two girls, but villagers became frightened and they killed the wolf. Both the girls, when they were rescued, they behaved like wolves, but Mr. Singh took them into his home. Mrs. Singh gave them names. They called the younger one as Amala and the older one as Kamala. Then move to the next paragraph. Kamala and Amala were afraid of humans. They were like wild animals. They had very sharp teeth and could see in the dark. They could smell things from far away. They could hear the slightest sounds. They ate, drank, and walked like dogs. They ran around on all fours, means they walk on four limbs. They drank water or milk from bowls on the ground. They were night creatures and walked around the children's home after dark. At sunrise, they returned indoors to shelter from the heat and the bright light. They slept together on the ground like puppies. Well, in these lines, we have learned that both girls were afraid of humans. They had sharp teeth. They were like the animals. They ate, drank, and walked like dogs. They walk on their four limbs. They were night creatures as they were active at the night and they move indoors in sunlight. and during sunlight they tries to find the shelter. They sleeps on floor like the wild animals. At first, Mr. and Mrs. Singh thought that Kamala and Amala did not have human feelings. They did not have a sense of humor. They were not happy or sad. They did not laugh or cry. After a year, when Amala fell ill and died, Kamala was heartbroken. She sat for 6 days by herself without moving. A few weeks later, she started walking around the house looking for something. She smelled all Amala's things, her clothes, her plate, her bed. Mrs. Singh did her best. She rubbed Kamala's body gently and talked to her. Kamala lived in the children's home for about 8 more years. The Singhs tried to teach her to live, to move, eat, and drink like a child. Kamala changed, but very slowly. She began to sleep at night and stay awake during the day. She even began to be afraid of the dark, and after sunset, stayed close to the Singhs. She learned to understand few words and says the words for yes, rice, and all right. One day she became ill, and the doctor couldn't save her. She died, part girl, part forest creature. Well, in this last part of the lesson, we have learned that after some time, Amala fell ill and died. The other sister was very sad, very heartbroken. After a few days, she began to normalize herself. She smelled Amala's things, her clothes, her utensils, which she often used. Kamala lived in the home for 8 years. Singh's family taught her how to live, eat, and drink like human. She learned and changed very slowly, and it took a lot of time to learn and behave like humans. She, we can say, that she learned to sleep at night like the humans. She learned few words like yes, no, all right, and rice. After 8 long years, she fell ill and died. In this way, we have done this whole lesson, but I will give you the question and answers which are at the top. You have to prepare the page like this, and you have to write the first question. What are their names? Their names were Kamala and Amala. Next, where did they live? They lived in a forest with wolves. Third one, why did they sleep on the ground? They slept on the ground because they thought that they were wolves. What do we know about their parents? And the answer is nothing is known about their parents. You have to write down this in your copies.